Hello, everyone. My name is Isabella, and I am about to celebrate my 29th birthday this year. It's been 4 years since I married my husband, Larry, who is 2 years older than me. Our son, Roger, recently turned 3. Initially, I was working full-time, but after Roger's arrival, I shifted to a part-time role at the same company to better balance family life. Larry, from the beginning, was quite forward in our dating phase, but I've noticed a more dominant side to him since we married. Larry has a younger sister, Rachel, who is a decade younger than him at 22 years old. Their significant age difference seems to foster a particularly indulgent attitude from Larry towards her. Before we were married, Rachel's regular visits didn't bother me. I thought it was nice how well they got along. However, after marriage, I started to see changes in her behavior. Rachel often arrives at our home unannounced and expects to be catered to, rarely bringing anything to show her appreciation. Whenever these situations arise, Larry expects me to serve her without question. Rachel often treats me as if I'm invisible, speaking only to Larry with a casual, "Hey brother, I'm here again." Despite not planning for an extra guest, I find myself serving dinner to Rachel. Larry, instead of showing understanding, criticizes me in front of her, insisting that I should have been more thoughtful. Even though Rachel offers verbal apologies, it's clear she enjoys the preferential treatment from Larry. After they finish eating, they leave the dining table a mess and continue chatting on the sofa, largely ignoring both Roger and me, treating us more like staff than family. One evening, just as Roger and I were about to take a bath, Larry loudly interrupted, instructing me to go out and buy a gâteau for Rachel because she wanted it immediately despite the late hour. Feeling under pressure, I reluctantly agreed to go to the gâteau shop with Roger in tow. While we were out, I overheard Larry and Rachel criticizing me for being inconsiderate and even questioning Larry's decision to marry me. Roger, not fully understanding their words, still sensed the tension. To lighten the mood, I asked Roger about his preference for the gâteau, and he excitedly chose one loaded with fruits. Our conversation about gâteau on the way to the shop helped distract us from the earlier discomfort. We arrived just in time before the shop closed and managed to find the specific gâteau Rachel wanted. We also picked up the fruit-laden gâteau Roger was excited about. Despite the challenges at home, moments like these with Roger help me navigate the complexities of our family dynamics. After serving the gâteau to Rachel and Larry, I prepared Roger's special gâteau with strawberries on top and brought it to the dining room. The moment I set it down in front of him, Rachel pointed at it, expressing her desire for that particular gâteau. Before I could even respond, Larry took the gâteau from Roger and placed it in front of Rachel. Disregarding Roger's protests, Larry justified his actions by saying he had paid for the gâteau with his own money and therefore had the right to decide who got which gâteau. My emotions overwhelmed me and I couldn't hold back any longer. I expressed my dissatisfaction loudly. In response, Larry threatened me with divorce. Roger, who had been crying, anxiously grabbed my hand and tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Mom, I also love gâteau with strawberries on it. It's delicious," as he ate a piece of the gâteau originally intended for Rachel. Feeling that Roger was suffering too much, I quickly lifted his plate when I saw Rachel reaching for his gâteau again. I took him to the next room where he could enjoy his gâteau in peace. In the other room, Larry apologized to Rachel, regretting his stinginess. Despite wanting to speak out, I refrained, choosing to prioritize Roger's well-being. Watching Roger happily eating his gâteau in the next room was a heartwarming sight. After finishing his gâteau, we decided to take a late bath and then sleep in Roger's bed. The next morning, I found out that Rachel had left early. As I was preparing breakfast, I heard Roger crying. Shockingly, his piggy bank, a cherished gift from my father, was broken, and the money he had saved was gone. Roger, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was devastated. When I confronted Larry about it, he nonchalantly mentioned that Rachel needed some cash, so she took it from the piggy bank. Holding a crying and trembling Roger, I felt his pain so deeply that I cried along with him. It was excruciating to see Larry prioritizing his sister over our son. Driven by anger and sadness, I confronted Larry more directly than ever before, breaking my usual practice of avoiding arguments in front of Roger. Larry, without saying a word, went to the bedroom and returned with something shocking in his hands: divorce papers. I was stunned to discover the hidden divorce papers that Larry had secretly prepared. In a sudden burst of anger, he thrust the papers at me before storming out of the house, the door slamming loudly behind him. As I stood there holding Roger, I realized the depth of the challenges we faced as a family. Roger, who had always remained stoic about the issues with Larry and Rachel, finally reached his breaking point, crying since the previous night. Unable to bear seeing him so distressed, I suggested we skip daycare for the day. His response was a loud, enthusiastic "yes," accompanied by a faint smile. It was clear he needed this day as much as I did, so we dedicated it to playing and bonding. Roger, beaming with joy, pulled a picture book from the shelf and climbed into my lap, declaring, "Today, Mama is the teacher at the nursery, right?" His innocent remark and angelic expression warmed my heart, and I decided to make the day even more special by taking the day off from work. Despite the potential inconvenience it could cause at my workplace, my colleagues were understanding and granted me a day off. In the morning, we visited the park where we played hide and seek and had fun with the sandbox and slide. When we returned home for lunch, Roger was visibly sleepy. Normally he would nap by himself, but today he fell asleep in my lap like he did when he was a baby. Initially, I thought about using the time to catch up on household chores, but I decided against it. Today was about cherishing these peaceful moments with Roger, so I let myself be healed by his serene, sleeping face and gentle breathing. However, this serene moment was abruptly interrupted by the sound of the front door opening, which was unusual since it wasn't Larry's typical time to come home. Alarmed, I quickly scooped up Roger and hid in the bedroom closet. Through the thin walls, I heard a voice. It was Rachel. My heart raced as I listened to her rummaging through the house, muttering in frustration about not finding something. She then made a phone call mentioning Larry and discussing their failed search. After she locked the front door and left, I quietly put Roger to bed and sat down, bewildered by the day's events. The realization that Larry and Rachel might be conspiring left me feeling betrayed and fearful. In a whirlwind of emotions, I swiftly packed essentials for Roger and me. We then headed to the train station and took a train to my parents' house, which was thankfully only 3 stops away. I hadn't informed them of our arrival, but the concern in my eyes was enough for them to understand something was wrong. They welcomed us warmly, no questions asked. Settling into the safety of my parents' home, I shared the entire ordeal with them, including my fear of returning to our house because of Larry and Rachel's unsettling behavior. The safety and understanding provided by my parents offered a temporary refuge from the storm brewing back at home. Upon my mother's speculation that Rachel might have been searching for my personal belongings, possibly cash or cards, I was prompted to think back on my earlier career successes. Before marriage, I had been the CEO of a thriving handmade goods company, a role I had passed on to trusted friends so I could focus more on raising my child while still working part-time from home. Unbeknownst to Larry, I had retained my position as CEO and maintained a level of financial independence that he was unaware of. My discovery of the hidden divorce papers Larry had stashed away made me suspect that he believed I possessed substantial savings. While I had mentioned to him that the company still provided me some financial support, I had deliberately omitted details about my role as CEO and the extent of my savings. This secrecy was born from my early realization that Larry was poor at managing finances and tended to spend all he earned. Initially, Larry had contributed a minimal amount for our monthly food expenses and even suggested I quit working to become a full-time housewife. Given the financial demands of raising Roger and the meager food budget, I never agreed to stop working. Eventually, Larry grudgingly accepted my decision to continue working part-time. Since Roger's birth, I've been using my savings to cover his nursery fees and clothing because the monthly food budget from Larry was inadequate. I never requested additional funds from Larry, reinforcing his mistaken belief that I had ample savings. Considering Rachel's apparent need for money and Larry's misconceptions about my financial situation, it seemed plausible they were searching for my cash cards. To safeguard against any potential financial intrusions, I have a separate savings account for Roger, into which a portion of my salary is directly deposited each month. Despite their attempts, they wouldn't find any cash cards as I always keep my valuables with me. However, the ongoing issue of Rachel's unauthorized entries into our home, potentially facilitated by Larry, remained deeply troubling. Following my father's advice, I decided to secure my valuables, including the cash cards, in my parents' safe. While I was pondering over their motivations for needing money, Roger approached my father, tears in his eyes, distraught over his broken piggy bank. This incident not only highlighted the immediate financial invasion, but also the emotional toll it was taking on my son. The news of Roger's broken piggy bank and his lost savings deeply upset my father, who was incensed by the story and vowed to confront Larry. My mother, however, suggested a more measured approach, finding out their motives first, as any rash accusations could potentially make us look guilty in the eyes of the law, potentially swinging the outcome of a divorce in Larry's favor. To better understand their intentions, I decided to secretly record their conversations. I consulted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's before heading back to our home. That evening, as I started to prepare dinner, I strategically placed my phone, screen down, on the kitchen counter to record discreetly. Larry came home earlier than expected and immediately began questioning me about my cash cards. His questions were probing, and when I responded with silence, his demeanor grew increasingly agitated. He demanded that I hand over the money I earned from my part-time job to support his sister. Refusing, I clarified that the money was meant for Roger's savings. In a burst of anger, Larry shoved the signed divorce papers towards me, accusing me of living off his money and claiming there was no need for me to save for Roger. His harsh words even suggested that he valued Rachel more than our son. Hearing this, I stopped cooking, grabbed the divorce papers, took Roger by the hand, and headed for the door. Larry's voice boomed behind us, declaring his serious intent for a divorce and instructing me never to come back. I responded firmly, stating I would not return to a home where strangers could freely enter and leave. Once outside, I received numerous messages and calls from Larry, which I chose to ignore, turning off my phone to seek refuge at my parents' house. There, I shared the recording and the divorce papers with my parents. Although I confessed to having no love or affection left for Larry, my primary concern remained for Roger. My parents supported whatever decision I felt was best, acknowledging the potential emotional impact a divorce might have on Roger. As we discussed these heavy topics, Roger, unaware of the depth of the situation, mentioned he was hungry. Seeing my distress, my mother kindly stepped in to make burgers, his favorite meal. Overwhelmed with emotions and the supportive environment my parents provided, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother served Roger his burgers with a warm, reassuring smile. As my mother prepared burgers, Roger and I were reminded that we could always find comfort and joy here with family. Taking a big bite, Roger's eyes lit up with delight. He praised his grandma's cooking, wishing he could have her burgers every day. Smiling, I told him that the secret ingredient was the love we all shared for him. In a heartwarming gesture, Roger took another large bite and then offered it to me. His simple act of sharing was so touching that it brought tears to my eyes. Despite my efforts to hold them back, The tears kept coming. Noticing Roger's concern, my father reassured him that my tears were tears of happiness, not sadness. Understanding this, Roger hugged me tightly, and I saw my father's eyes brim with emotion, reflecting the deep value of family moments like these. In this comforting family setting, I explained to Roger how precious family truly is. Surprised, he asked if Dad thought that only Rachel was considered family. My father gently confirmed this was not the case and asked Roger if he would like to live with us as a family. With a joyful laugh, Roger happily agreed, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. Amidst these tender family interactions, the warmth and support made me realize that it was time to part ways with Larry. The decision was tough, and the thought of discussing divorce weighed heavily on my heart. However, Roger seemed to intuitively understand the need for change, expressing his wish to continue living as a true family here, even playfully calling our older pet dog his younger brother. The next day, we began formalizing the divorce proceedings by contacting a lawyer who was a friend of my father. As we set the legal wheels in motion, my father and Roger shared comforting laughs that lightened the atmosphere, while I spent moments in bed reflecting on my childhood and the strength I had gained from my family. Upon checking my smartphone the following day, I found it overwhelmed with over 180 calls and messages from Larry, revealing his emotional turmoil. Exhausted by the barrage and needing clarity, I turned off my phone. With the lawyer's help, we explained the entire situation to my parents. It came to light that Rachel had accumulated significant debt due to a gambling and shopping addiction, adding another layer of complexity to the already strained family dynamics. Larry had assumed the role of guarantor for Rachel, secretly planning to use my savings to cover her debts. The lawyer informed us that the divorce papers had already been submitted, and Larry, overwhelmed by the reality of the situation, broke down when he realized the divorce was finalized. Despite anticipating disagreements over child support, he agreed to pay $405 each month for Roger's upkeep. In a later conversation, Larry's tone was markedly less aggressive. He calmly admitted to his financial manipulations and shared his complicated feelings about his responsibilities towards Rachel. I firmly stood by my decision to move forward without reconsideration, and hearing his faint sobbing just before he wished me happiness and ended the call. Remaining resolute, I discussed future plans with my parents and decided it would be best for Roger and me to stay with them until he was older. I resumed my full-time role as president of the company, reaffirming my commitment to a stable and secure future for myself and my son. Later, I learned that Larry and Rachel had explained the situation of the divorce and Rachel's debts to their parents, which led to their disownment by their family. Today, I find immense joy and peace in being surrounded by my loving family, far removed from the tumult of my past with Larry